This is not the video I've planned it originally. When Dehancer reached out to me, I was so excited. I immediately planned a lot of video ideas, wanted to test so many different footages, and even planned to make some short travel film. But then I got sick. The kind that you can't even leave the house, and I've temporarily moved back into my parents' house because they're out of town and I don't want to get my wife sick. Being back here alone brings back a lot of memories. A lot have changed. My old room is now my father's new study, and my brother's is now a storeroom. There's not much to do around here, so I turned on the TV. I haven't watched TV for such a long time. The original broadcast TV. The type that you can only watch what they are showing you with a tons of advertisement. This is crazy, right? It is so hard to find anything interesting, and all I can think about is, should I stop? Well, the rain is being very consistent. Haven't stopped all day. So why should I? And I guess the moral of the story is, when life gives you a lemon, make it into a movie. And make it with Dehancer. Use my promo code, can you do it, and get 10% off your purchase. Okay, so now let's take a look at how I use Dehancer to color grade my footage. Here I have another sequence that I shot with my Fujifilm XS-10 and the Canon FD lenses. So I'm just trying to test out how the 8-bit footage will look like with Dehancer. I usually have one primary correction before going into Dehancer. I'm just making sure my hand is not overexposed. And then the next node, I have Dehancer. So the first half of Dehancer is the input correction. So I'm shooting a Rec 709, so I choose Rec 709. So everything in this input correction tab is actually applied before going into Dehancer. So you can change your exposure, you can change your temperature, your tint, and defringe. So if your source image have chromatic aberration, it might interfere with some of the effects that you may use later, like the halation or the bloom. So you can enable defringe and then get rid of your chromatic aberration here before going further into Dehancer. So once that's done, you can go on to pick your film profile. According to Dehancer, each film is very accurately sampled with all their characteristics. And how I choose my film stock is I just go through each of them until I find something that I really like. For this, I went with the Kodak Atachrome E100, which looks quite good to me for this scene. And this push and pull, because each film reacts differently, depends on how much light they receive during exposure. So you can just play around until you find something that you like. For this shot, I would leave it here. So the next section, it's the film developer. This part is to simulate the analog developing process for developing film. You can change your contrast and camera here. So color separation, kind of controlling the saturation of the picture. But when this value is decreased, the saturation of the most intense color is reduced first, while keeping the medium and low saturation color. Color boost, it's just saturation. You can crank up your saturation for the whole picture. I think here is good. The next tab is film compression. This part is to simulate how film is dealing with highlight. It compresses the tonal range, redistribute the highlight to make it smoother. So you can see if I turn it on, the overexposure of my hand sort of disappear off. And I like this because it sort of saved my mistake. Impact determines how big of the compression you have. The higher this number is, the more compressed your highlight will be. The white point is the film clipping threshold, and it will affect contrast. The closer the white point to the mid-tone, the more contrasty the image will be. So if I put this down, my hand will start clipping again. So I'm gonna go back to 100. Tonal range is the width of the tonal range affected by the film compression tools. 0 means no compression, and 100 means compressed from the brightest highlight to the deepest shadow. Color density, this controls the color intensity of the compressed range. At 0, it produces lowest saturation in the highlights, more like the negative film. At 100, it gives the maximum saturation, which is more like positive film. So this is like a creative direction. If you put it to 100, then you can see the highlight on my hand, the saturation increased. And if it go to 0, then you see my hand is more white. Next section is expand. Dehancer recommend this should be the first parameter you adjust after choosing a film profile, but they didn't put it under the film profile. So black point is sort of like your shadow and white point is your highlight. Color mode is useful if you encounter some unwanted color shift or oversaturation. So in the luma mode, the expand affects only the luminance component of an image. It does not affect the color. So next we have the print medium. Each print medium have its own tint, photo latitude, and contrast curve that makes it a very useful creative tools. So the linear profile is digital. And then you have some positive film here, the Kodak 2383 and the Fujifilm 3513 movie stocks. And you have the Kodak Endura glossy paper, which is a negative film. So just play around with them, and because I'm learning color grading, so I just tend to choose Kodak 2383 over the others. The target white is only available when printing in Kodak 2383 or Fujifilm 3513. And it allows you to adjust the color temperature of the printing light source. The exposure tools here is based on the characteristic curve of the print. So adjust the exposure here will affect the image contrast too. So be aware of this when you're changing exposure here. The tonal contrast will give more punch to the image when increased, or it will like soften the image when you decrease it. Color density here affects this significant color in a higher degree. So you can see it's only affecting the orange in my hand and the little blue behind it. So saturation is just saturation. If you enable this analog range limiter, it will make the image softer and improve the details at the extreme end of the tonal range. So the color head, you can further adjust your color here. And then these 3 tones here, you can control the color temperature separately within these 3 ranges. Okay, next with the film grain, there's 2 types of grain. Negative grain is more pronounced in the highlight. The image have a slightly higher micro contrast. On the other hand, positive grain is softer and it is less pronounced in the highlights. I like to see more grain, so I like negative grain. And there's 2 processing mode. Analog is the original type of grain that requires more processing power, but it looks more realistic. The digital processing mode is the high performance mode that might give your computer less of a hard time. Because I'm using a M1 MacBook Air, it's not easy to run anyway. So I just keep it in the analog. So next we have halation. Halation is a film characteristic where there's like an orangey red halo around bright light source. It will also give like a quite pronounced red glare in midtones, mostly affecting skin tone. So watch out for that when you're using halation. So let's break it down. Source limiter. 0 means even the weakest source is able to produce halation. Increase that, you can control the amount of halation you have. So background gain. This will set the range of the background tone on which halation can be visible. The default value allows halation to appear on most background. So smoothness is to control the halation between large and small source, visibly smoothing smaller halation details. 0 smoothness leads to most detailed halo. Okay, so local diffusion is the size of the halo. Global diffusion is the secondary glare produced by the scatter light, and this is more like a global effect. Amplify here is different from impact. Impact is like the opacity. So amplify is how intense you want your halation to be. If I turn this all the way up, you can see more orange sort of getting into this footage. And hue modifies the sensitivity of the green layer of an emulsion. Use this to match the halation hue to the scene. Sometimes if you have a cool background, and it usually dampens the halation. Blue compensation allows you to counterbalance it. Impact is your opacity. Mask mode is the preview mode that isolates the effect from the source image. Next, we have bloom. Bloom is like a black pumice filter but with far better control. Next time I'll shoot something without my pumice filter and tells you what the experience is. So stay tuned. Next we have vignette. People with budget lenses or who played around with Lightroom should be familiar with vignetting already. It is an optical flaw, but it can also be used creatively since your audience will be more directed into the center of the image with a little vignetting. So there's one thing. After you apply Dehancer and then you play back your footage, it will be super choppy. So I'm just getting 4 or 5 frames because I have M1 MacBook Air. There's a solution for that. If you go to playback and then go render cache, you can either put it in smart, so it will render everything in the background, or you can use user. So if you put it into user, and then on the Dehancer node, you right click, node cache, and you press on, and you can see this turn red. And on your timeline, you can see it is rendering this clip. So once this finish, this turn to blue, then you can play back without problem. So if you put it in smart, then you can see it will render the whole timeline for you. Once this render is done, you can play it back without any problem. So this is it for this tutorial. There will be more video on Dehancer coming on the channel. If you like what you see, please subscribe, give me a like, comment down below. This is Ken, and I'll see you next time.